Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. It's a beautiful day. It has been most of the time, anyway, that I've been awake. Um, I'd like to talk to you about I guess this is the Sunday right after 4th of July weekend, or weekend celebration of 4th of July. And I thought about what 4th of July is all about, of course, freedom and things of this nature. And one of the things that keeps coming as a common theme is fire, or at least the fireworks and the cannons roaring and the flag waving in the sky as they wrote the national anthem, with the fireworks and the cannon sparks and everything else. It just seems like there's fire involved in it and all that stuff like that. So I kind of thought to stay on that same theme about fire. And the title of our talk is Tending the Fire. And we're going to draw from Leviticus, the 6th chapter, and a story there that's really neat. And I want to kind of relate that story to you. But let me read it to you from Leviticus chapter 6, starting verse 8. Not very many verses, so hang in there. It's a great little story. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. Command Aaron and his sons. This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering is to remain on the hearth, on the altar, all night until morning, and the fire of the altar must be kept burning on it. Then the priest must put on his linen robe and must put linen leggings over his bare flesh, and he must take up the fatty ashes of the burnt offering that the fire consumed on the altar, and he must place them beside the altar. Then he must take off his clothes and put on other clothes, and he must bring the fatty ashes outside the camp to a ceremonially clean place. But the fire which is on the altar must be kept burning on it, and he must arrange the burnt offering on it, and offer the fat of the peace offering up in smoke on it. A continual fire must be kept burning on the altar. It must not be extinguished. Now, I want to take that story, and I want us to kind of visualize what just happened in that story. So I'm going to tell you the story in my own words of how I kind of picture this as if we were watching a movie and we're watching it live, played out in front of us. So there's a small group of men who walked into the room discussing their daily activities and events. Comments could be heard regarding the local mayor's race and maybe the price of donkeys that lately had been going up, and maybe some family news between them. But they're bantering back and forth as men usually do. Someone contributed a joke, possibly, he heard recently, which was kind of met with chuckles, and then another member as well, how one joke feeds another one. They automatically moved to their designated places and began changing clothes to the beautiful robes and breeches laid out on the table in front of them. One robe was much finer and ornate, indicating that someone of high importance, it was only natural that the older one of the group would be dressed in this attire. The light trivial talk subsided as concentrations were brought into focus about the task to be done. Finished dressing, they silently cleansed their hands with water and their heads with reverence. The priest led them into the courtyard where an altar centrally stood with a fire burning on the top. Directed by the priest, the others carefully, so as not to disturb the flame, scraped the dead ashes off into a container, which was handed over to the priest. He returned to the room where he reclothed himself into his street clothes and carried the container to a designated area outside the camp to deposit these sacred ashes. Upon returning after once again and changing into his ceremonial robes, the others have since then refurnished the fire with fresh wood, and the holy offering was waiting to be burned by the priest for the sins of the people. The supreme duty occurred twice a day with equal and unwavering reverence. The supreme duty of fire on the altar stood as the highest on the list. The eternal flame, which sacrifices to God, was not to go out, no matter the circumstances. Other duties could slide, and other tasks could be deterred. But the fire on the altar was not to go out. Why? This visible symbol of God's presence and uninterrupted worship offered by the covenant people in rededication of themselves was to be preserved. You know, we're removed from these ancient days of that ritual we're talking about there, and customs that is somewhat at a loss, really, to our lives. For within the ritual, we are reminded of a spiritual value. We do not worship with burnt offerings. We do not maintain a literal eternal flame in our churches. Our altar candles are relit every service. But there is a sense in which the challenge to keep the altar fires burning remains true and binding on us once again, that the presence of God, the supreme deity of all believers, is there among us. For the Christian, on our altar of the heart burns a fire of devotion and worship of God. Now there's an inner flame of his presence, an inner consecration and devotion of our deepest selves to him. And there's that sacrifice aspect. This fire glows warmly in the interior of a life of a Christian. Likewise, it must not go out. Whatever else a person may choose to do or not to do, the fire must be tended to and preserved at all costs. Now, I'm not implying that the Christian faith is a solitary exercise in navel gazing. Christianity is personal. It's not private. The deeds done and the efforts are attempted in the name of the faith and are only as holy as the inner fire of devotion to Christ is burning brightly. I'm going to say that again. Listen carefully. The deeds done, worship, whatever we do, and efforts, the work of God, are attempted in the name of faith and are only as holy as the inner fire of devotion and passion to Christ that is burning brightly within us. It's only as good as what we have in our hearts. St. Paul touched on this theme and stressed the difficulties of this when he said in 2 Corinthians, through our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. So the process of taking root downward is so that we might bear fruit upward. Whatever else we may need to be delayed or adjusted, the fire must not go out inside of our lives. Our very soul, it should be burning brightly within us. There was a young boy who walked into a drugstore and asked to use the telephone. He dialed a certain number. This is back in the old days, of course. And he said, and overheard being said, "Hello, Dr. Anderson. Do you want to hire a boy to cut the grass and run errands for you?" "Oh, you already have a boy." "Well, are you completely satisfied with the boy you have?" "Oh, okay then, goodbye." Well, as the boy thanked the druggist for the phone, the druggist said, "Well, just a minute, son. If you're looking for work, I could use a boy like you." Thank you, sir, but I have a job," said the boy. "But," said the pharmacist, "didn't I hear you trying to get a job from Dr. Anderson?" "Oh, no, sir," said the boy. "You see, I'm the boy who is working for Dr. Anderson. I was just checking up on myself." Isn't that a neat story? There's so many threats to our interior fire, which left unchecked can extinguish the fire in devotion to God without even realizing it. It slowly just dies down and dies down to where the embers finally just wink out, and we're not even realizing it. No fire can burn without fuel. The priest had to ensure that a steady supply of fuel would be there, lest the flames be exhausted by the lack of fuel. When I know there's a winter coming in Colorado, I ensure that the warm months I accumulate enough wood for the cold months. I must keep trees cut and logs split, and that takes a lot of effort. They just don't magically happen in piles outside my door. No, I spent the whole summer and fall cutting and splitting and wherever it may be. So when the winter months come and the snows start falling, the firewood is ready for me. And I am tired from that effort, but I have the warmth now in my home. I'll give you an example. There was a man who was dissatisfied and restless with his job. He explained his problem to a very wise friend who replied with a request. Okay, said the friend, inhale as deeply as you can. Now exhale again before you exhale. Well, the man tried, but quickly began to sputter and wheeze. He couldn't exhale twice. Regaining his composure, the man asked the friend the reason behind such a silly request. His friend replied, that's exactly what you've been doing in your life, and that's why you're all used up. You see the point? He has kept on exhaling his wind no matter what. We have so busy days every day, living along with additional pressures and demands. Does it leave you kind of wrung out like that man said that you try to exhale twice and you can't do it? Many Christians struggle with the nemesis of spiritual and emotional exhaustion. A person drained in mind and body finds that their interior life is threatened as well, not just their fatigue on the outside. In a culture where the rewards workaholics and sneers at underachievers, the groundwork for exhaustion is ready-made threat to us. While I was in the Army, I often said that it was made up of AAA behavior addicts that made up the Army. They just couldn't have enough work given to them, and to the detriment of their families and their own spiritual life. Even ministers, Sunday school teachers, and other religious workers are not exempt from this. I read a story about a gifted preacher of the last century by the name of Robert Murray McCheyne, who died before the age of 30, a physically broke man. He was never had a strength in him in physique and drove himself unmercifully in work. A year before his death, with signs of impending collapse very clear, he said to a friend, God gave me a horse to ride and a message to deliver. Alas, I have killed the horse and cannot deliver the message. The truth finally settled in his mind, but it was too late. The response to exhaustion is simple, but hard for those who are emotionally chained to that treadmill of overwork. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus surrounded by a pressed crowd. People submerged in him their needs and gave everything to them. Help us, help us. And Jesus noticed another group whose resources were being depleted, his disciples. He says to them, come away by yourselves to a lonely place to rest a while. In other words, you can't cure everybody all the time. You've got to take a pause. You've got to take a time to bring the Spirit back in, to get those fires of passion relit in your hearts and minds. Now, this is one of at least 27 instances where Christ insisted for a time to be taken to get away from the burdens of work. It was his wisdom that we recognize when a person is used up so that the person is on a shelf of rest for further service to God. Now, the second temptation to our inner self is not just exhaustion, but is neglect. This was a constant threat to the priest. There was nothing terribly exciting about watching a fire for hours at a time, especially at night when you want to doze off. When I am burning wood in my fireplace in my living room, I cannot just wander off and expect it to keep burning like when I left it consistently. Over a neglected time, it will consume the wood and slowly die down even to the ashes. It needs to be fed with fresh wood consistently to keep it warm and keep it bright. I have never met a person who had crashed overnight in Christian faith. Have you? I have never come across anyone who has said, I woke up one morning and decided I no longer believe in God, the Bible, or Christ. I never met that person. But I have met many persons who have dropped out of a once vital faith who have oozed out of the right relationship with God over a process, as the wood was never replenished in their souls. A few weeks ago, I went into our garage to take our car to an appointment. The dash warning lights came on telling me that one of the tires was low in air. Okay, that happens. So I looked around and all at the tires, they all seemed to be okay, maybe a little bit low, but no big deal. Well, I forgot to air it up. And since it wasn't flat, I kept driving thinking I'll get to it. When I finally decided to put air in it, I was surprised to see how low it had become. I then quickly aired it up. But soon afterward, my wife and son went to an appointment, and I got news that they had a flat on that same tire that I had just aired up, and it was fine. When it was being repaired, I was told that the damage that made the tire blow out had been internally. Because what happened was, as the nail was inside and it kept draining air out, I didn't fill it up. It get lower and lower. It was pressing on the inside of the tire outward. And when I reinflated it up, well, that was a weak area now, and that's what blew out. So my neglect caused that tire to be damaged and my wife stranded to have to fix that tire. All because of neglect. Through neglect and inattention to the nitty-gritty of inner life, the flame of the soul could die out. Living things die through neglect. A plant, a garden, friendships, marriage, relationships, and even a car tire will die out from lack of nourishment and being neglected and being taken care of and keeping your eyes on it at all times. Most people give greater attention to the beginning of the relationship with Christ than cultivating that relationship in the journey of faith. What the church called the means of grace slowly is laid aside for other interests. We get excited on Sunday morning at church. We get to hear the great sermons. We hear the great choir, wherever it may be. But then that Sunday afternoon and then finally Monday and all the way day by day to Saturday, slowly the air could leak out, could it not? And the fire in our soul, the passion and excitement of that worship service, could all of a sudden, we neglect ourselves, we neglect God, we neglect staying in tension with Him, staying close to Him and feeding that fire of passion. By the time we get to Saturday, then all of a sudden we're just depleted inside of ourselves. It's like the great flakes of dried paint peeling from an unkept inner altar. So quiet, the personal disciplines of the Spirit just waste away in our life. So Bible study, prayer with our Lord, private and public worship, Holy Communion, all these and much more will slip from view and the fires die. Neglect can be understandable, though. The Bible can be hard to read. We're tired. We possibly are distracted with worries. The time for prayers offered to heaven can seem like it kind of landed like lead. Public worship is dribble and maybe crawl with tedium. I sure hope our Sunday school class is in that way. You're not feeling that right now, for that matter. But I've been to many services that's like, my heart wasn't in it, and I just couldn't hear much out of it, and da-da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden, the passion wasn't there. And those times do happen, and we have to fight against that. So if neglect is the problem, then the response is a beginning with an inventory of what is neglected. So what am I neglecting? The problem must be faced and acknowledged, not only by ourselves with humility and honesty, though, but also our Christian friends around us can point out the dry areas in our life, those times when we are just not doing what we're supposed to be doing. What's wrong? They would ask us. So, as a neglect, there's a process and there's a remedy to do something about it. And it's fair to center on one area. Our prayer life may be restarted or rekindled and rebuilt for the fire, one stick at a time, for the flames to catch hold and grow stronger. It might be just a little more consistently. I pray a little bit longer. I will concentrate a little bit more. I will do it more often during the day. And that's how you keep feeding that fire till it finally gets blazing strong. The final peril to our inner life is compromise. Now, for my fireplace here, fires, I need some seasoned wood that is dried out. Also, dry wood that's been out of the snow and rain. I've learned the hard way that some wood burns better than another. Some is hotter and lasts longer, and some are slow. Other wood just smolders and it won't catch on. It's really hard for it to burn. I need to know my wood. There's a profound difference between a healthy flexibility and unhealthy compromise in our integrity and values. Fire and water are not compatible. A blazing fire cannot come from drenched logs. Some things cannot go together and retain integrity. When deeply held convictions are bartered away, the flame of inner devotion to God is dampened, and the heart, purified by a cleansing faith, is nothing but a wet smoke that just dissipates, just steam. When values are sullied in a trade-off for acclaim or power or security, selfish interest, there's more that is always lost than really gained in all of that. Jesus said, "What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" So we are called to fight with all of our conscious powers to retain the integrity and inner character, regardless of the cost. Did you hear me? Regardless of the cost, even to the cross. We may lose much that we honestly desire, or we may not. We may find praise and promotion or other gains going to another, but we may not. We just don't know. The issue is, deeper than what is gained or lost is surface sense. That is, in other words, Augustine, the great church father, said this: "O greedy man, what will satisfy you if God will not?" Ouch. He said it best. "O greedy man, what will satisfy you if God can't satisfy you?" You know, compromising in our lives can be very subtle. It takes bits and pieces of our attention and focus till all of a sudden what was important is put to the back of the line. For example, when I want to lose a few pounds of weight, I take a serious breath and focus on what to eat and not to eat and when to exercise. But since I'm out with a dinner with friends, well, then I'll just have a bit more bread on the restaurant's famous dessert maybe. Oh, everybody else is having it, so I've got to try it because they keep advertising. Just this once. Then soon I'm tired and I don't feel like fighting away the temptation, and just this once I'll eat something that has more calories than I really need. It just keeps getting worse and worse. I just kind of give up gradually. And then I wonder why the pounds don't drop off. The issue of compromise touches what we are. What we are before God and when we stand in the mirror of our soul. Compromise can quench the flame in dimming both vision and desire for God. But character and courage drawn from the shared strength of friends in Christ around us, the Spirit of Christ and the Word of Christ, can be kindled and inflamed and renewed in our relationship with Him if we just put the effort into it and worry and watch out for the temptations that come our way. We have an altar, the altar of the heart, on which burns a fire kindled by the grace of God. On the altar rests our deepest allegiance of life given to God, flaming presence of a risen Christ. Keep the fires burning. Whatever else may slide or be deferred, keep the fires burning in your heart. Whatever the pleasure and whatever the cost, keep the fires burning in your heart. God, whose mercy through the cross first brought flame to life, will not leave us alone in this. The fire must not go out. So let me ask you 3 questions for you to think about in this lesson as I conclude. Has God placed a fire of worship, reverence, and obedience in your life to tend to? What are some of the dangers of allowing the fire in your soul to weaken and even go out? What are you facing right now that you know is a danger? And lastly, how can you help your family and friends to keep their fire glowing and hot with faithful passion for God? What can you do as a priest of the Almighty God? May the Lord bless you, and may your fire burn bright. May it be just so bright like the sun because of your love for the Lord. Keep that love. Lord bless you.